Good morning. As you can see from the slide, my name is Michael McDonnell. I'm Director of Road Safety Scotland, which is part of Transport Scotland, and delighted to be here this morning to kick off this prestigious event. I'm going to talk a bit today about lifelong learning and how important it is for us in terms of what we do and how we try and introduce road safety from a very young age. Next slide, please. But first of all, I suppose the question is fundamentally, what is lifelong learning? And there we have one definition of it, and I think it's good to know that we're all lifelong learners and will be for the rest of our lives. Recently I was asked that we get a bit of ministerial correspondence in, and I was the appointed officer, so I had to respond to a piece of correspondence about microplastic pollution. And I had absolutely no idea what microplastic pollution was, and therefore I had to do a bit of digging to find out. So it was a very, very steep learning curve for me. But what it did remind me of was this notion that lifelong learning is important to all of us in every step of life, at every stage of life, and we have to continue to make sure that we embrace it as much as possible. Next slide, please. In Scotland, that means for us the curriculum for excellence. It's the philosophy which underpins all road safety learning in Scotland. And I suppose for us, if we're not playing in that arena, then we're not in the game at all. So each year since Curriculum for Excellence came out, we have introduced this guide and sent it out to every educational establishment or relevant educational establishment in the country, which really looks at the principles of the Curriculum for Excellence and how they can fit into road safety and vice versa. Because I think this notion of cross-disciplinary working is very, very important no matter what walk of life you're in. Next slide, please. Within Curriculum for Excellence, the important things are the 4 capacities, and again, there's probably nothing earth-shattering in here, but these 4 capacities are designed to help children become effective contributors, confident individuals, responsible citizens, and successful learners. And as it says in the middle of the box, these are not only skills for learning, but they're also skills for life and work. And no matter, as I say, which discipline you're working in, these are admirable outcomes, and I think what we'd be hoping for our children and young people in any walk of life. So these 4 capacities are also underpinned by 7 principles. Next slide, please. And these are personalisation and choice, coherence, relevance, challenge and enjoyment, breadth, progression, and depth. And again, these are critical to the way that our children and young people learn. Next slide, please. So this is all very well, but what has it got to do with road safety? Well, as I said earlier, from a road safety point of view, it's important that we understand about the learning process. And we took advice from a variety of people, both specialists in education, and we even worked with the Scottish Violence Reduction Unit. I know that may seem surprising, but when we were developing the resources, it was key that we understood everything that we could about the developmental process of the child and the young brain. And one of the critical things that came up for us was that even pre-birth, there is stuff going on. So before a child is born, the brain is making links to a variety of things. But what the violence reduction input showed us was that if children live in an aggressive or abusive environment, or if they're being nurtured in an aggressive, abusive environment, the links that the brain would normally make don't get made. Instead, they go into shutdown and protective mode. So these were valuable lessons for us, not only in terms of the necessity of early intervention, but also the types of intervention that we might be undertaking. Next slide, please. So going back to the 7 principles, and again, how does this relate to road safety? Well, if we look at it from personalisation and choice, it's important that we're aware of and react to the individual needs of those with whom we're going to be working. In terms of coherence, it's about combining and building a toolbox of skills, and that's really, really important in road safety. It also has to be relevant. How does this activity relate to their lives and what their own experience is? From the point of view of challenge and enjoyment, we should be encouraging people to aspire to higher achievements and encouraged to reach high aspirations. In terms of the breadth, we need to set this in a variety of contexts. It's not sort of sitting in front of a teacher like it may have been 30 or 40 years ago, or even 50 or 60 years ago when I went to school. But there needs to be a variety of contexts in which children can learn to give them that breadth. Progression too is an important thing, and I'll come back to that later. But we have to build on previous experience, this notion of a spiral curriculum where children learn what's important, relevant to them, and understandable at that particular time. But these are not only just what they need at that particular time, but they're building blocks for what they might need to know in the future. And finally then is depth, the need to advance the skills at each stage. And from a road safety point of view, it's in this context that we needed to develop our own resources. So next slide, please. Coming on to our own resources, these are the ones which we have developed for use in an educational setting. So in early years, from age 3 to 6, we have Go Safe with Ziggy, a well-researched resource which we spent a lot of time and effort on, again, bringing in specialists, as we do with all the resources in that particular environmental educational environment, to make sure that what we develop and produce is fit for purpose and does what it says in the tin. Following on from that, we have a resource called Street Sense 2, which is a main resource for primary schools, and that's currently in the process, well, almost finalised in actual fact, the review of that, and will be replaced by a new resource called Road Stars. And this constant process of reviewing is something that's really important to us. So while we spend a lot of time, effort and money investing in any particular resource, it's also key that we continue to review them, make sure they're still fit for purpose. And if not, then we need to be brave enough to say we need to change or tweak, or indeed just bin and start again. And that's what we're doing with some of them at the moment. And Road Stars, which will replace Street Sense 2, is a perfect example of that. Now, following on from that, at the upper end of primary schools, we have a Junior Road Safety Officer scheme, which is active in every single one of the 32 local authorities in Scotland, which is really, really good news. And this peer-to-peer scheme is really, really brilliant. Kids love it, and we're very, very active in that particular sphere. Moving into secondary schools, we have a resource called Your Call, and Your Call specifically looks at the fact that children leave primary school, they're given a bit more latitude by their parents, there's much more independent travel, and that transition period for us is a bit of an issue. So Your Call looks at the transition period, the more personal responsibility and the greater distances being travelled to secondary school. And then finally we finish off with a resource called Crash Magnets, and Crash Magnets will be the next one to be reviewed because it's been around for a while now. And it's amazing how when you do web resources you learn just how quickly things change and how quickly things can become out of date. So Crash Magnets is the next one that we will be reviewing because we need to look at just what we're doing for those who are about to become much more independent road users, either as passengers or drivers in cars with their peers. But I suppose from our point of view, the big thing is that they're all hosted on this roadsafety.scot website. And we're undergoing a massive rebuild of that site now because the way in which people access the internet and the devices and the time they're prepared to spend on any website is changing dramatically. So the whole Road Safety Scotland web portal is undergoing a fairly substantial rebuild, costing 6 figures, believe it or not, and we hope that will be ready in time for the new financial year round about April. In addition to this, we also have an additional support for the learning resource. So we're working closely with colleagues in Education Scotland and the Scottish Government to make sure that when we develop this, it's suitable for the children who have additional support for learning needs. And we're also asking them to review our other resources that are mentioned on this page, just to make sure that if they're being used by children who have additional support for learning needs in mainstream schools, that they are still fit for purpose. Could the next slide, please? I just suppose one thing before I show this video, and that is that I am a primary school teacher to trade. That's where I started my career over 40 odd years ago. But one of the things that was very important, you learn very quickly when you're teaching primary schools, that no matter what you are doing in school, You have these children for approximately 5-6 hours a day. Much of what you do can be undone by the attitude of parents. And so I think our lifelong learning process also needs to take into account how we can influence parents to try and make sure that in terms of road safety, they're doing the right thing for their children too. And I think we made this video a few years ago just targeting parents, just to let them understand that it was a young driver campaign in actual fact, that no matter what anybody's doing in the field of road safety education, no matter what driving instructors, the police, other people that are involved are trying to do, much of it can be undone just by the attitude of parents in a very, very short space of time.
The wheels on the car go round and round, round and round, round and round. Amber light's gonna change, not gonna slow down all day long. Take a look around and answer my phone. If no one's around, I can speed my way home all day long. The stupid old man, get off the road, get off the road, get off the road. If he doesn't do that, I'm gonna explode all day long.
By age 4, their brains are almost fully developed. What kind of driver are you teaching your child to be?
So the Jesuits, who have got the responsibility for a lot of stuff in life, said at one point in time, "Give me the child and I will mould the man." So I think that's key to the attitude and the approach that we take. I mentioned earlier on, one of the 7 principles was progression, and the United Nations is also reflects that in that phrase there. To be effective, road safety education should be provided on a systematic and continuous basis in preschool establishments, primary and secondary school, within out-of-school activities and places of further education. And I think these two things, these two quotes on this slide are key to what we are trying to do to make sure that learning in the formative years is seen as part of this lifelong learning process. I mentioned earlier the whole notion of microplastic pollution, and as I say, I had to go and find out what it was, and many of you may very well be aware of this, but I wasn't. That, you know, when you run along a road with a car, your tyres wear. What happens to that wear? When you brake, your brake pads wear. What happens to that wear? Well, these are what appear in the atmosphere as microplastic pollution. And while they are not good for our respiratory disease, for respiratory diseases among humans, one of the things that I learned was that they're ingested by tiny organisms, and when these tiny organisms ingest them, they think they've been fed, so they don't eat, and eventually they will die out. And I think as we embark on this same day in COP26 in Scotland, and the aspirations that might have, the aspirations of our road safety framework in Scotland, which was published earlier in the year, are the need for us to be conscious of what's going on in other disciplines, in other walks of life, that we can use to influence road safety. And hopefully that will guide us towards a safer and better country. Last slide, please. And I suppose that's me finished, but I think that the one thing that I have taken out of a lot of my career to date is that every day is a school day, and it's very, very important for us to realise that. Thank you very much.